Okay, so here we go. This, I'm not sure where to dive in a little bit on some of this, so thought I would start pretty basic with this slide here. I think there are people who don't even know what the Ice Age Trail is. So this is a National Scenic Trail. It's on the caliber of like the Appalachian Trail, and it's in Wisconsin. So I was in Wisconsin for sabbatical for the summer. That red is the current shape of things, and the intention there is, as Bill Moorman will tell you, is that it was designed to follow the terminal moraine the farthest extent from the last glaciation. So several chunks of glacier that poked along those ways, and that's why we have that shape. So there's what the trail looks like.
Nick, I have a question.
Not yet, you don't. All the gear as things ended up on the trip. So there were a couple of things that I started with that I ditched later on, but there you've got it. You saw the trail and that's what I used, so that's it. It left me again, Kaisa. Oh, there. All right, Larry, what do you want to know?
Why does it make a circle around Devil's Lake?
Actually, it's to the east of Devil's Lake. It splits at Devil's Lake, so that's called the bifurcation, and they decided they wanted more trail to show two different things, and more on that maybe momentarily, but yeah, two different chunks that split, showcasing two different parts of glaciation, I'd say. Peter, what did you want?
I forgot.
Okay, great. That works even better.
How many Starbucks on the trail?
0. Yes, Tom.
Tell us a little bit about how you found your way.
Yeah, okay. So this is just I want this slide as a check-in to feel a little bit of where you wanted to go in the hour, because like I say, I didn't really know what to expect. Is this like a really basic, you wanted just to hear what's an Ice Age trail? Was it that you know plenty about the trail? Pat's been walking pieces of it with her family, so she doesn't need to know about the trail. Maybe she wants to hear, I'm thinking about doing this one next spring, and what's that segment like? And the rest of you might say, what's a segment? You might want to know, Joyce came in and she said, were you ever afraid? And so if you've got that kind of question, then I can just be trying to monitor some of these. So I collected a bunch on Facebook this week and had those copied here to try to hit some John.
I'd like to hear what kind of thoughts you have about the world or internally or whatever changed from start, and then changed after you got done, and if that changed your mind on something.
Okay, yep.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry, I've got this microphone hanging out here that I was going to give to you because the people online probably can't hear either. Go for it, John.
I was just wondering what he changed in terms of his thoughts of maybe the world or maybe his internal thoughts, if this was a life changer in any way.
Nobody else? Okay, we'll see what we hit here. Thanks. So just a little bit on the basics. This is the Ice Age Trail Alliance headquarters in Cross Plains. The trail itself was the notion of a guy named Ray Zillmer who lived along the Kettle Moraine in the 1950s, and as he was trying to preserve some of the Kettle Moraine, he was lobbying, saying we should have a national park that's the whole amount of this trail. And eventually they decided that no, that wasn't feasible to do it as a national park. But then they did establish in 1980, they made it a national scenic trail. And so been going since then. You probably heard the news a year ago that they gave it national park status. It had been part of the national park system beforehand, so I'm not really clear. The only thing that I've heard about what that means is it opens up the chance for more funding. So otherwise, I don't really know that it gave it a different functional status at all. So pieces, the Alliance manages lots of it. So there are chunks that are DNR property that the Ice Age Trail Alliance manages. There are chunks that are on people's private property. There's the trying to coordinate the users and purchases and all of that. And again, more on some of that to come.
Are there any gaps anymore, or is it complete?
We'll come back to it.
Okay.
So the trail is, you see little brown signs about this big all over the place that say this trail is maintained entirely by volunteers. And so here was a work crew outside of Holy Hill over by Milwaukee area. And so I walked up and they were putting in this new boardwalk. And so this was a new chunk of trail that instead of routing around on this little bit of farm road, they were going to be able to follow over this marsh area on a new boardwalk. And I was walking along, and then one of the trail crew people came and said, would you like to come have supper with us? And that sounded great. And so they gave me pizza and beer and then dropped me back off where I was on the trail. So that was one of 3 times that I passed big work crews like this, working on enhancing trail. And then other times I'd see a guy out with a mower or something like that. So lots of volunteer work. I found myself often wondering if there were more hours put in on working on the trail than there were on people actually using the trail. So again, here's the shape of things, a little bit of my data for you. So following the trail, I started on the east side, more on why I did that later, walked to the west side. Overall, that was July 6th to October 10th. So that's 1150 miles for the route I did. I did the eastern part of the bifurcation. The western part is mostly road still, so you walk through the city of Baraboo as the only official trail part on the west side, and then it's just lots of roads, so I went east. So 1150 miles, 62 days, is about 18 and a half miles a day as I was walking, and that at about 2.5 miles per hour. So really what I did this whole time was just walk. I'd get up and eat my breakfast and start walking and stop when I needed to eat some peanut butter or some trail mix, and then I'd walk, and then I'd stop maybe when I needed to charge my phone at a park shelter or something, or when I needed to pump water from a stream, and then I'd walk, and would do that pretty much until about dark. And that was the shape of what this was, just walking, which some of you maybe even heard me say I loved it because I had one thing to do. So here's a little bit of Hildy's question. Between the two sides, it's about 1,200 miles of trail, two sides of the bifurcation. And so there's about 700 miles of it that counts as official trail, and 500 miles that is still what they call connecting routes, which, so to count as a 1,000-miler, a person who's completed the trail, you have to do all 700 of those miles, only choosing one side of the bifurcation. The other 500, the connecting routes, you can choose your own routes. So sometimes I could find ways that were a little bit shorter than the suggested route. Often that meant it was a little bit busier road that I was walking on. Sometimes I chose a different route because it took me closer to a city for getting some resupply. So also then, in this picture, you see a bunch of variety of trail. The one in the middle is a chunk of rails to trail bike path, and so that was early on. That one, I was looking ahead on one of those stretches of path and thought, I don't know when I get to turn, and it's been 11 miles, I think, since I last turned. So those were some of my least favorite. It was hard on the legs because you just are so repetitive motion on those, and I mean, it doesn't go ups and downs with that kind of path. The one on the left, the trail goes actually right through the middle of the stream. You can see a post on the other side. So a number of those where you had to ford streams. Tom, I think, asked about finding your way. And so the yellow blazes are the markers for the trail, and some with arrows like that on the top right, directing you to turn. These vary a lot. Some stretches of trail had plenty of blazes and you were easy time finding where you were going. Other stretches you could walk and not see anything and found yourself thinking, am I on the right direction or not? In terms of other resources, there's a guidebook that does some descriptions of trail and a little bit of mapping, and so I had that downloaded to my phone as a PDF. And then there's an app that called Far Out, which is really amazing because it has GPS, and so like if I'm trying to figure out the trail and starting to go this way, I can be looking at the app and it'll show me getting further or closer to where the trail, I need to actually take 5 steps back this way, and that gets me closer to the trail. So tried not to spend the whole time just staring at a phone, but a nice resource anyway, and something very different from how the trail used to operate. A couple more varieties of trail here for you. The one on the far right is my favorite kind of single track trail with a lake alongside of it. The Ice Age Trail Alliance loves boardwalks. So you get a sample of boardwalk there, some rocks through some mud. That was a brand new stretch that they had just worked on and weren't done with it. So it was lots of mud, and if I would have been there 4 days later, I would have had a lot cleaner feet. And then a road to show you just a feeling of connecting routes. So lots of walking through Wisconsin countryside along little farm roads. So the what did I expect kind of question. I researched and knew the basics, knew what the trail was, knew some of where it was going to go, knew some of how things operated on it, like dispersed camping areas where it was okay to camp and stretches where there weren't those opportunities. A lot of what did I expect, I had no idea. So, I mean, one version of that was that it's so interesting to go one way always. So, any moment, I didn't know what was going to be the next part of trail I would see. And then I would walk past it and never see it again. I mean, some of these places in Wisconsin, just little roads in the back of wherever, I'll never see them again. So it was one way and seeing things just once. That in terms of what to expect was really interesting. A lot of the what to expect on just how this would go. You might remember my phrase beforehand was, I'm hoping to hike the Ice Age Trail, or I'm going to try to hike the Ice Age Trail. I said that to somebody along the way, and they sort of laughed at me, and I said, well, who knows? And then, I had been pondering all of the little random things that could happen that would mean that I wasn't going to get to hike the trail, and come up with new ones just all the time, and then found a new one that took me off anyway. And the phrase up there, constant learning. The very first day I started with way too much food in my bag. I had at least 10 days worth of food, and that was like part of me feeling secure. I'm a skinny guy, and so I like calories. I need calories, and that was over secure on that point, because I was walking through at least one town a day for those chunks and would have been able to find anything. And so instead I'm just lugging this pack that was probably, I would have loved to have been something like 25 pounds, and I was probably mid-30s at that point. So that constant learning, I still felt on the last day like, oh, I know how this works now. I'm getting the hang of this, and I need to remember. And it was like, I don't need to remember because I'm done. So here's why. And so I'm going to give you, some of you might have watched, I was doing little Facebook recordings for you along the way because people kept saying, well, how are you going to tell us things? And well, we want to know what's going on. And so this was my little way to give something to you so you had something to hang on to while I was going. So there are a bunch of these videos that are connected to our Advent Facebook page. And so this is going to describe a little bit of fourth grade for you. Also the why, I'm from Wisconsin, I love Wisconsin. It's this personal pride thing that for a while this was one of the national scenic trails, and for a time it was the only one that was all in one state, and we've got it, and that's awesome. So I like Wisconsin. COVID and church recovery was one of my answers too. I read a book, Thousand Miler, by a woman who was trying to set the fastest known women's time on the trail. And then she ends with this epilogue talking about a guy who had done a couple of tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he came back from those and founded something like Wounded Hiker or something like that. And he wanted to do the Appalachian Trail, and part of his sense was that it used to be when you finished in war, you had to walk home, and that was sort of a reset time. And now we take people out of battle zones and drop them back into their neighborhood the next day and just pretend like they're going to be able to do life. And so COVID was hard here. Don't know if you had that feeling from me, if you had that feeling of church itself, and all the other ways in your life too. But I needed a little bit of walking COVID behind me, and so that was an important part of why. And also I'm an introvert. So quiet time alone, just great, yes, please. So Beth Felkos had asked a question about random acts of kindness, and I certainly had some of those, but there are people who are in touch with trail angels like every day, who are getting supplies from them, who are getting rides from here to there from them, who are staying at their houses instead of camping. If I could find a way not to talk to somebody, I would do that. So. Kaisa, go ahead on the video. We'll see a little bit more of fourth grade. This guy's going to tell you. Listen to him.
I have gotten asked why I have decided to do the trail. And one of the things that I answer with that is that COVID was really tough in the church. And so needing to walk some of that behind me was some quiet and get away from it was a motivation. Another thing was that the Ice Age Trail for a time was, it's a national scenic trail, so on par with the Appalachian Trail. And for a time it was the only one that was all in one state. And I live in Wisconsin, and so really cool that we had this trail here. But another part of it here is in this second place that is personally important to me and that I really wanted to get back to the trail to get to. In fourth grade, we had a unit where I got to learn about glaciers in the Ice Age. I remember a long, narrow, 3-foot sheet of paper where we drew a mile-high glacier, and then to scale drew things like the Statue of Liberty. And then later on with that, we got to come here to the Ice Age Interpretive Center outside of New Auburn. I remember it being a chilly day and not having warm enough clothes for the day. Interesting contrast with today that is here October 2nd, and it's been in the mid-70s here in this stretch that's really unseasonably warm and fire dangers today. So these things that make it feel like a different world in those ways, that along with all of the horrible stuff from Hurricane Helene that's been in the news right now, and those people, what they're going through. But it also makes me wonder if we're going to create a world through climate change where wintergreen might not grow in these woods anymore. So it's a great day anyway to be here and to be thinking back and to be thinking about what comes forward and what we might do. So there you go.
Hey there.
So there's a little bit more of the whys. Here, this was officially named Unnamed Lake. And there was a little campsite right next to it here at dusk. And this was in the Harrison Hills segment, which is up in the Northwoods, north of Merrill, sort of near Tomahawk, and was probably my favorite segment, with a lot of those single track trails with pine trees and then lakes along the way. And I felt like I made good progress that day. Maybe heard some wolves as we were getting toward evening, and stayed at this unnamed lake that I decided should be called Sabbatical Lake, not just for me, but for anybody, and had zero human contact that day. That was, I think, the one day out of the whole thing. But so I was waving at cars as I was walking along roads, and didn't have a car that I waved at, didn't cross another person on the trail, so zero human contact that day. Here's some more why. So the one on the left, when I had less gray in my beard, was my 2010 sabbatical, and as part of that, when I went out to Holden Village, so there's a picture with a big tree, and what I do on sabbatical is take my picture with big trees. So highlights of the trail. This was one of the questions on Facebook. So different things that were exciting about the trail, good things to be around. Here's a day in the Northern Kettle Moraine. This was some of the first spot with topography. It had been after a chunk of, I don't know, 35 miles or something of roads, and was finally starting to hit things that felt like, oh, this was made by the Ice Age. I mean, so flat stuff coming out of Door County, sure, it was made by the Ice Age because the glaciers just wiped things flat. But this felt like, oh, here's some actual topography. Here's glacial landforms. And it was like 90 degrees, and so that's all just sweat from going up and down these hills. Hummocky topography, they call it. So lovely in there. And this was the day before I killed 383 deer flies. Another highlight in the Central Sands region, much less buggy in the Central Sands part of the state. Here was the lake where John Muir's boyhood home was. I'd never stopped there before. You see signs for it along I-39, I think. But just to feel some of that connection and feel his legacy. So I started on the east part of the state over at Door County. That's backwards from what a lot of people do. A lot of people will start on the west and then go over to the east, and so like the guidebook and stuff is written that direction. It made it a little bit confusing because I had to be trying to read directions backwards. But I wanted to start on the east to get some of that east side stuff done with. It's much more urban over there. I was surprised by the Northern Kettle Moraine. I'd never been there, and that was lovely. I had this vision that the whole first part of the trip is going to be flat, and so it wasn't, but that was some of my reasoning to get past it. But I really wanted to get to this chunk of the Northwoods. There's a 200-mile stretch where it's almost just all trail chunks without connecting routes and things. So Kettle Bowl outside of Anago is where I went into that. Yeah. And so the picture on the bottom there is my tent with the trail running right past it. And so that was just so quiet in the woods. The birds weren't making any noise. There weren't bugs around that day, just quiet, kind of wild. And so here's the next chunk from the Northwoods the next day in the lumber camp segment, and that was pretty awful. So the trail can be logging roads, and so you had these enormous things tearing it all up, or ATVs that can run around and make all sorts of muck. So other highlights, I think I mentioned this in the video. I walked out to get coffee, so I didn't hear the whole thing. But after I was off with my knee injury, it wasn't for me really so much the thought about, I really want to finish the trail. I need to complete the thing. But partly it was that I wanted to get back to some of these things that have been goal places for me, that felt like important parts of the trail. And so I had 3 of them that I hadn't gotten to yet. So I was hiking towards the Northwoods and was in the middle of the Northwoods chunk when I needed to come off. But then beyond that, had these three things. So the top left is the cabin that my dad and I built when I was in high school. He lives there during summers, and it's just next to a connecting route outside of Cornell and Chippewa Falls and that. So it felt cool that here's our cabin, and the trail goes right near this. I wanted to make it there. The bottom left is the Chippewa Moraine segment that I talked about in the video from 4th grade. That felt like a really important, I want to get to this thing. This is part of my motivation for doing the whole trip. And then the bottom right is the cabin where I started staying as a Boy Scout in 6th grade. And I stealth camped there that night and went back and slept in my same bunk that I'd used for years. So the trail goes through Scout Camp, and I remember as a kid seeing signs that would say Ice Age Trail at Scout Camp, and then so wanted to be able to make it back to hike to Scout Camp and get to do this. Really cool because I spent lots of time at Scout Camp, and there were parts of the where the trail went that I'd never been in camp before. So some exciting things that you see along the trail: a bench. And this is entirely honest. There are people who give recommendations and never pass a bench. You're going to want to use that bench. And so here's Silence is Golden alongside a little lake. Exciting things, a bench. Exciting things you see along the trail, a bench with a footstool. This was in the Central Sands One-Hole County chapter, loved making these footstool benches. Exciting things you see along the trail, a bench with a rock behind it. So there's some of the geology. Erratics are these enormous boulders that show up out of place. So get carried along by the glaciers. They often have some rounded edges because they have tumbled a little bit. But all of a sudden, here's a huge rock. It's an erratic. And so, hey, look, a bench with an erratic. Just an erratic. So this one, they call the Stone Lion. If you look a little bit, do I have a... What did that do? Kaisai just destroyed things. I thought I was maybe pushing a button that was going to be a pointer. Thank you. So you can see maybe the snout of the lion and its mouth there. Exciting things. This tells you sort of this is the level of calm on the trail. That, yes, this is an exciting thing. I'm not just making this up. Mushrooms, they were just wild. Joanne Straight said jewels of the forest kind of thing. Yes, Joanne? And so I spent a lot of time wishing I knew more about mushrooms. I know about plants. I know about birds. I could identify those, and I can't probably identify a single mushroom, but spent a lot of time admiring them and wishing. Well, you have to try. You have to find some way to know. Tiny things. So up on the top left is a little tiny frog that was on day 2. So they were just all over the place on that Rails to Trail bike path, and swampy stuff all along the sides with big frogs making noise. Bottom left, I think, are tree frogs, and so those are 2 the same day. And I was seeing these beige-colored ones. Can you see it there? And so seeing these beige-colored ones and thinking, I've not seen a beige frog the rest of this trip. What is it? And then realized that it's tree frogs that change color. And so it was that we had brown leaves all of a sudden, and so they were green by the green leaves and brown by the brown leaves. And a little tiny snapping turtle. Sandy wanted pictures of cuddly things. She said this to me as I was getting started, and the deer hated me. I wasn't sure if it was because I had an blaze orange backpack, and they're like, get out of here. But by Holy Hill, there was a spot where I saw, I think, 38 deer in a field, and I'd never seen so many deer in a field before, and a couple more of them were walking across the road, and there's a car coming the other direction, and this deer's like in the road just staring at me like, I'm not the one who's the problem. There's a car. Get out of the way. I remember Scout Camp always had tame deer, and there's no hunting, we always said, and so it was that they didn't know to be scared of people or didn't need to be scared of people. And so that was the only time out of the whole thing that the deer didn't instantly run away from me. But very few cuddly animals. So here's some more geology. So the top left is an esker, which is kind of an underglacier stream bed. So the water of a river is running and it drops things down onto the, the stream bed. And then there's ice on both sides of that. When the ice goes away, the stream bed is taller, and so you get this snaking esker. Which, I mean, if you're me, this is cool stuff. You don't have to like it. Exciting things you see along the trail. Cows that were interested in seeing me. They thought I was the exciting thing. So the one with the white patch on its forehead came running toward me as I was walking along the fence of this connecting route. And then it ran away a little bit, and then it ran back to the fence, and everybody else needed to come and see them too. What birds do, so you can see power line there with a whole bunch of tree swallows on it. And the tree swallows are all lined up just thick on power lines, and as you walk toward them, they all fly off into the field. Red-winged blackbirds, it was great when I went back out later on in the fall because they'd all migrated and they left me alone, those jerks. They sit on the power line and they take turns one at a time flying over your head and yelling at you. Indigo buntings, I was just amazed to see so many indigo buntings. They wait until you get close on the power line and then they go off and sit in a tree for some time. So, John, this is a little bit of an answer to your question. I had a high school classmate who did 3/4 of the trail and then she quit, and for her that 3/4 was all she needed. She left the trail, went back to life, and had changed direction, changed careers. Like, she just had this new self that emerged out of it. So I was wondering, is there going to be a major revelation? Is there something that I'm really going to learn about myself or whatever? And I learned what birds do on a power line. Which, again, to me is just like, if you're me, that's plenty good. I'll take that. But so also that question of where's Jesus? Lynn Breedlove and Evelyn Mazak were the first to make a connection with the Camino de Santiago that they had done, and sort of this spiritual walk, a pilgrimage kind of thing. And a number of other people made that Camino connection for me. Beth was one. So I don't know about the spiritual part of things. Where's Jesus? So there's Holy Hill up on the top. I couldn't find the trail that led up to the top of Holy Hill, so I didn't actually go this time. The place on the bottom left is a little county park where the signs said no camping, and there was a police car that pulled into the parking lot just about that, a little bit earlier than this at dusk, and so I was trying not to get caught. Houses around half the lake, but then the other half of the lake had no houses, and that was a fun place to be because it reminded me of the Boundary Waters, and it felt good to be there. The one on the right with the tall pines, there's a beaver lodge right at the base of the pine, and a beaver was swimming away as I walked up. So what does that say about Jesus? I don't know. I thought that I was going to make it to church on Sundays and get to be exploring other churches and seeing how other people do things. In Elkhart Lake, there's a UCC, and I had known the former pastor, but it was like 2 miles away from the campsite where I was staying. And the way this works is I could be 3 steps past something and think, I want to see what that is, but it was not worth going 3 steps backward, doing this much walking. So I was not, and it's interesting, in the middle of the North Woods along the ISH Trail, they don't build churches. So I was not by churches a lot. So where's Jesus, and what was the spiritual experience? Still working on that one, maybe. Exciting things you see along the trail. Here's litter. So this 1,000 was litter that I had in my pocket when I crossed the 1,000-mile mark outside of Weyerhaeuser. And so Kaisa, this is going to do a video that talks about finding litter on the trail.
So one of the things I'm doing as I look for ways to occupy time as I walk along and try to do some good is picking up little pieces of litter. I'm obviously limited on what I can manage by the size of my pockets, so don't get to pick up all of the Busch Light cans and Pepsi cans, both of which are outnumbered by the stupid plastic water bottles. But I'm up to, this is number 735 here, and so verse 150, I got to think of psalms I could remember along with them, and now I can see what I can remember from the ELW hymnal. 735 is, in the creation section, a great one that I don't do nearly enough. Mothering God, you gave me birth in the bright morning of this world. Creator, source of every breath, you are my rain, my wind, my sun.
So, I mean, I love the theological notion that Jesus is in the litter, but maybe that is some of what the experience was. So, if you didn't catch that, this was on day 12, and I had picked up 735 pieces of litter at that point. And when I could remember where that was in the hymnal, I could sing along with it. This is partly an answer to Scott Bauer's question about what was on my mind as I went along. And so this did some of it. There was a real surprising amount that is just in the moment of paying attention. I mean, so paying attention like as birds are doing something on a power line, but also paying attention on where are my feet going. I was saying to Pat as she was coming in that she knows the experience of, I've seen the entire state of Wisconsin in a view like this. Because you're watching your feet for where's your foot going, what are you gonna need to avoid, rocks and roots and things like that. And so there's an amount that is just paying attention to that. But also for Scott's question, there was a spot after I was up into the Northwoods in this, I lost the name right now, section that has mountain bike trails and horse equestrian trails as part of it. And was realizing my brain was so quiet that I was just making up random little phrases that went along with the cadence of my feet stomping. And so, I mean, like nearly a hallucination level of just my brain has nothing to do. And maybe Jesus is there too, I don't know. Yeah, Beth?
Can you talk about your hiking shoes?
Yeah, I will. Right now, in fact. Good question, Beth. So here's some pictures of the foot experience, including the one on the bottom left. I was saying to Peter Williams, so this is half of the clothes that I wore. I had 2 pairs of shorts and 2 of these shirts that were what I wore day after day after day. So I decided to do a little show and tell for you. And I was saying to Peter, when he came in this morning and was questioning why I was wearing shorts, that this morning with the frost, I started hiking and it was colder out than it is today. Stupid Wisconsin winter. And so, so that 1,000 Miler book was part of what made me think about this. She was writing just about incredible foot problems that she had. She was having to find urgent care because she had cellulitis so bad from her shoes. And this is somebody who was getting resupplied. Like every intersection she would come to, they would swap out her shoes and she'd get dry socks and that kind of thing. Clearly, I wasn't going to have that. And so started thinking, could I do it? I love these shoes. I'm a minimalist that way. A number of years ago, I read the book Born to Run that talks about native tribes in Mexico and their running with Huarache sandals, and just the human anatomy as developing from being a running being, and that it didn't used to involve Air Max shoes. So the notion of hiking boots, especially for long distance hikers, is almost entirely gone. Really, people don't wear hiking boots. A lot of people would wear trail shoes as being, first of all, lighter, second of all, drying out quicker. The notion of needing ankle support is also not what it used to be. Now there's really an understanding that if you are using that sort of ankle support, your ankles are going to be weak. If you don't have that kind of thing, then you're going to have muscles that are going to make your ankles stronger. And so for me, minimalist footwear has helped a lot. In high school, when I was running cross country, I had custom orthotics that were balancing my foot. I had such bad arches. And so either arch is a muscle in your foot. And this kind of thing builds that and changes my posture in all sorts of ways, makes me feel better. And so that was the thought, can I manage this on the trail? So the first full day, I was overloaded, as I said, with food. I was also not sure how things worked, so I was trying to make it to a campground where if it would have been later, I would have just hidden off into the woods, but still at that point I didn't know that. So I walked over a marathon on day 2 and had a little bit of blisters from that day. But then at that point, really not much to worry about with blisters. My feet were pretty well toughened up. And so I would say I feel really good about the shoe selection and how that worked for me. The last full day that I was on the trail before I needed my break, there was a guy at this little county campground who was also a long distance hiker. He was going the other way, and so there was just a little out and back section in the Merrill School Forest that we did together. And excuse me, as I was starting that morning, I was saying, yeah, you know, my knee's a little bit sore, and generally you just walk it off and it starts to feel better. And he was saying, yeah, you listen to your body. And he had started the trail 5 years ago, and he did 200 miles with his hiking shoes and had trench foot and was losing toenails, and then ended up with stress fractures in his femur and his tibia that put him in a full leg cast. And so it was funny because he's talking about his knee injury, and then the next day I can barely walk. But some of that anyway to say that I don't blame my knee problem on this footwear, because it could have been anything. I think it was probably more that I had done 23 straight days at that point, averaging right around 20 miles a day. And if my body would have been smart enough to give me a heads up a day sooner, I could have taken it easy and rested it some, and instead got to come off and rest for a long time instead. So also you hear about people, there's a guy who's got a photo book and did the trail in segments and in sections, and he went through 3 pairs of shoes somehow as he was doing his section hiking. So the fact that these little tiny sandals lasted the whole way, I had bits of thread that I needed to replace to patch things, but otherwise, yeah, I'm pleased. So does that answer your question, Beth? Okay. So problems. What went wrong? What was hard? The picture on the top left is at Devil's Lake. I was staying in the campground there and had gone to brush my teeth or something in the bathroom. Oh, and the things that you discover on the trail, one of the most amazing things in the universe is washing your hands with soap. I spent a lot of time with dirty hands, and so when you came up on a place where you could actually wash your hands, fantastic, just amazing. But so I had gone to the bathroom, I think, and left my tortillas out on a picnic table, and raccoons got into it and shredded some of my tortillas. And so, I mean, that's a version of something that went bad in a small way that could have been bad in a lot bigger way. You know, that if a bear would have gotten in and hauled away all of my food, there could be challenges in making it to new food. So losing a few tortillas was not bad, but that's what that picture is there. The bottom left is wearing a head net. So after that day with the 383 deer flies, I don't like head nets. I never use them in the boundary waters, and I decided it's better to put on the head net. It would be, when I would have a deer fly, a gnat, and a mosquito, all 3 of them that I was dealing with at the same time, I would say, okay, it's time for the head net. So the problems, yes, the knee. The eastern part of the trail, this was a surprise. The real challenges were finding water and finding places to camp. So the trail is not set up always to provide those kinds of things. They have a few dispersed camping areas. Once you get to the Northwoods, you can camp any place. You can just step off the trail and set up your tent. In the county and national forests is wide open on what you want to do. But on the east, it's not. And so it's lots of stretches. You know, I would have 50 miles where I was going through farmland. And so there isn't just a campground a block off of farmland. There sometimes wasn't even woods. And same with water, that could walk a chunk of a day trying to find a stream to filter. For the western part of the trail, maybe an issue with supplies. That 200-mile chunk in the Northwoods was sort of realizing, okay, I need to be just ready with what I'm going to need for this chunk of time because it isn't walking through a town that day. The lose-win of connecting routes versus trail was always an interesting thought as I went along, because I could be in the woods, and during the 90-degree July days, there's not a lot of breeze moving through the woods, so it was hot in there, and the bugs, but I was getting to do this interesting chunk of trail, and then I'd walk back out to the road, and it's boring road, but there also would be a little bit of breeze moving, and you'd be back in the sun. So lots of time, that also went with the thought of enjoying myself, and it was a moment by moment sort of thing, that it wasn't even full days that I would be, this is great or this is awful. I could be walking along feeling like it, my body's feeling good, the pack is riding right, it's not squeaking right now, and so this is a great experience, and then 3 minutes later it could be, this is stupid, why am I doing this thing? It's just back and forth that way, and that's sort of the question on connecting route versus trail, just always something. Major problems, like losing my fingernail clipper. I didn't know where it went. I never discovered it. Must have left it someplace. But like that, in its own way, was a problem. I had 3 days before I could get to a town that had a fingernail clipper available. Phone charging was a question, including that when I was in Rosholt, was in a town for an evening and hanging out at a bar to charge my phone and my battery pack, and my charger, I realized partway through, stopped working. And so again, it was going to be so I woke up really early the next morning and went over to the gas station, and they didn't have a charger that worked. This was a brand new charger before I started the trip, so it had lasted for like 3 weeks. And then the Dollar General wasn't going to open for another hour and a half, so do I hang around for the hour and a half and miss out on covering some of that distance? And so I walked up to the next town and found a different Dollar General and got 2 chargers to replace the fit on the one that I had. But just that question on this device, partly for recording photos, all of this kind of thing, partly for emergency, if I get into trouble, and also partly because that had the maps and the app on it, and so really needed this thing to work. And is it going to work? From MCC experience, I dropped when we swamped the canoe, I had my phone in my dry bag and it stopped working. So the sort of, is this gonna happen on this trip, and what happens if it does? Bugs were a pain, certainly early on. That was a real nice gift. So in spite of not wanting to do the break and be sitting around and resting, I said beforehand, and some of the thought about why of sabbatical, that I didn't want to just sit around the house and read. And so then I had 3 weeks where I was just sitting around the house and reading. But one of the real gifts of that was getting to see 2 different seasons on the trail. So I left and it was still summer feeling, and then I went back out and it felt like fall at that point. And that meant there were way fewer bugs. It meant that the woods just sounded different. The red-winged blackbirds, as I said, had all left, and so really different feeling that way. So a bonus of the break time anyway. Down at the bottom there, autumn daylight. That was also a real change because it was getting dark by about 7 o'clock, and so earlier in the year, I could walk until 8:30, and so it just meant I had less daylight available for walking all day, and then also more evening of, there's not a lot to do in a tent. I carried a book along and I carried a magazine, but partly just sitting with a lamp on in a tent is like, well, I guess I'll just go to sleep. Moods, I said a little bit about that, just on that feeling of why am I doing this some of the time. Wrong turns, not major, but a number of those, and again, if it is annoying to take 3 steps the wrong direction, the day that I discovered walking out a wild rose that I'd gone 40 minutes on the wrong connecting route was not a fun realization. It did make me grumpy enough that I was walking really fast after that. So down at the bottom are some of the things that other people talk about that weren't really problems for me. Farm dogs running out. I had a couple come out, but some people will carry pepper sprays and be ready to bash dogs with a walking stick, this kind of thing. Foghorn, whatever those are called, to drive them off. So I had a couple come out, but nothing that felt too aggressive. People complain about the drivers on the connecting routes. That was, for me, part of the reason to wave as hey, I'm right here, and thanks for seeing me, and only had one driver that I really felt like, right outside of Slinger, that I felt like that person did not see me at all. Bears, there was one spot that said that there'd been a bear that got acclimated to human food, but I didn't see any bears, didn't have problems that way. It was a really low tick summer, it seemed. I think I had 3 the whole entire time. Poison plants like poison ivy and parsnip, yes, thank you. But managed not to encounter those. So a thank you slide. Just a week or so ago, with Dorothea being the last one that I heard from, we passed the goal for my Lutherans Restoring Creation fundraiser. So this also, if this is not a grand revelation experience, if I'm not out here actually learning anything, if I'm out just satisfying myself by getting to be alone in the quiet, through this season I felt bad about it because all of you were stuck around news and I was getting to escape from all of the political news. So there's some of it that felt pretty selfish. I appreciate Larry and others, Anna, who works sabbatical task force stuff here to make that a beneficial time for you while I was away. But sort of some of, for it not being a selfish experience, was the reason to do that fundraiser. And so thanks for the support of that. If you hadn't heard or followed any of it, I was aiming at $10 per mile that I was going to walk, and so we did that. Phoebe, the national director, I said, well, I think I could raise a couple $1,000s pretty easily, and she said, well, maybe 5,000 we could start to do that, and then she said, well, I don't have a problem if we don't make the goal. It's fine to set a big number. So how about 10,000? I said, well, what if we did this 11,510 so that it was $10 per mile? And she said, sure, great. And so we made it. Thank you, everybody. This is a place with really minimal income, and so that's going to be a big chunk of what they run on for the entire year. The website there on the top right, Peter Bakken used to manage that. You see creation care commentaries. I've gotten to write some of those. That's one of the ways I've been connected. I try to start by saying, and this time I decided to end by saying, that everybody should get a sabbatical. So you might not choose to hike the Ice Age Trail in little sandals, but just this kind of time, this sort of space to be is such an amazing gift. So thank you, and the ways that we can be thinking about that for others. I had a bunch of people ask, well, who else gets a sabbatical? And I said, well, professors, but they end up having to do often a lot of research and work while they're doing theirs. And so just the space to be, the first time I came back in 2010 and thought, this is why teachers get summer break, and it's an entirely different way to reapproach than what you do without that time. So So thank you. Yeah, I was going to say we've got like a minute and a half for what I didn't talk about that you want to.
And Nick, I'm just wondering, would it be possible for someone to hike the trail and stay at hotels and such all along the way?
Yeah, definitely. So Pat's doing it with their siblings and doing it as section hiking, so doing a bit at a time. So most of the people who would complete the trail don't do it as a big, long through hike. With the trail angels and that sort of thing, so there are places where you're right by town and you could say, I'm going to stop here at this town tonight and I'm going to do this much distance the next night because then there's another hotel there. You could ask trail angels, again, who might let you stay at their house or who could drop you at a hotel. One of the guys who posted a lot in the Facebook group and was finishing a couple weeks after I did, I think, I'm not sure, he hardly tented.
Wildlife observations, you have turtles and anything else of interest?
A few snakes, one groundhog that was playing chicken with me on a boardwalk outside of Merrimack. A porcupine the first night when I went back onto the trail. Yeah, lots of birds, enjoyed birds. Was surprised at how few loons. Where did they go, Linda? Where's Linda? The loons, I heard one, and that made me feel, that was right before Wild Rose, that made me feel like, oh, I must be getting north, and then thought I would find a lot more, and didn't. Yeah, Tom?
Trail users, was there only the one that you talked about? Did you see anybody else? Ask anybody?
So I said early on that I'd wondered if there are more people, if more hours are put in working on the trail than actually using it, and was very surprised. My standard line was, if I see 2 hikers on a segment, that would be a lot. And so there'd be segments where I would see 0. I would say mostly those are people just sort of out for the day, out for exercise, whatever. Toward the end, there was a day where I think I came across 6 different people, 3 sets of 2 that I think were probably all through hiking. A couple of different encounters with people who were doing section hiking and said they were doing section hiking and sort of trading notes with them. But yeah, not a lot of people. Dan.
What did you read along the way? Anything interesting?
So the one book that lasted me the whole way, so I started with 2 books and ended up ditching one when I went through my sister's for a cousin's wedding because I didn't need to be carrying an extra book. James Fenimore Cooper's Pathfinder was the novel that lasted me the entire time. So in the evenings, by the time I would get it done with supper and into the tent, I would do a little bit of looking at what was coming up on the trail the next day. And a lot of the time, if I read 4 or 6 pages, something like that, that was about what I had energy for and was ready to shut my eyes then. So the one book lasted me the whole way, and it was fun because I started reading it. I've been this is one of the 5 in the series with Last of the Mohicans is the best known out of them, and this one starts right along Lake Huron, and I started reading it while I was camping right next to Lake Michigan. So I picked it up because it was wandering through the frontier in colonial days, and so it felt like it could be a matched experience. That and Christian Century. Yeah, Peter.
Did you sleep well? How many hours a night?
More than I do around here, so that was a benefit of the experience. And again, partly, by autumn when it was dark so early, I might have my eyes closed for most of 10 hours. It was still a mix on sleep. I would think for using that much energy that I would just be, really ready to rest. And there were nights where I was not falling asleep great. There was one night in the northern Kettle Moraine where it was so hot, and I just laid there and just, yeah, hot. And when finally I could hear a little rustle of leaves and feel like there was a breeze, and I just heard it, that was like the relief of now I can fall asleep. Mm-hmm.
After that question, how about night dreams? Is this experience, you're not more, recall the night dreams?
Night dreams, she said. Oh, I forgot to be handing this around again. Shortly after I was back, I had a hiking dream of walking along a stream and over a footbridge and under some trees. And I mean, it was still this strange dream world, but it was definitely hike related.
How many calories was your goal per day?
I don't know. I don't count things like that very much. Well, how many calories? Sorry. A calorie goal for the day. So I have no idea. Breakfast, I would have a couple oatmeal packets and had a pour-over coffee thing, so I did get a small dose of my coffee. And then I figured, at least for some chunks, I figured that every 2 miles I was stopping for some water, and every 4 miles I would stop and actually take a break and sit down and rest a little bit, stretch, and eat something. And so that was either peanut butter in a tortilla. A couple of times I got cheese to go in tortillas, or trail mix. So that was through the day. And then when I stopped in the evenings, I was heating up some sort of supper, ramen with textured vegetable protein, or did a lot of rehydrating beans and rice. So, yeah, I don't know on calorie goal. In the initial chunk, I think until I came off the trail with my knee stuff, I sort of supposed that I was maybe down about 10 pounds, and I don't really have 10 pounds that goes away easily. The last 300 miles when I went back out, I didn't seem to lose. I think that was partly because I was around some more towns, and so was having some suppers at establishments instead of out of my own pot.
I appreciated the John the Baptist look cultivated.
Thanks. She appreciated the John the Baptist look I cultivated, if you didn't hear that one. Yeah, Dorothea.
Never have campfires.
Once. Mondo Esker segment, I decided to do a little fire, partly so that I could say I did a fire. Man, and so it was really so interesting, it wasn't exactly like a camping experience. I mean, I was in a tent night after night after night, but not just like going camping in other ways.
Would you do it again?
No. I was asked as I was getting toward the end that sort of thing, and I said, I'm never walking any place ever again. I'm going to drive around in my car. Just the pace is so slow. I'd have people pass me on a bicycle and think, you mean person, look how fast you're going. This takes forever. Yeah, so I have no aspiration to jump onto the Appalachian Trail. We can leave that to Dobbin. On the other hand, I was 2 days off the trail and got together with friends in the Twin Cities on the way back down toward here. And one of my friends said he'd been doing some of the Superior Hiking Trail, and that the friend he was doing it with had stopped being in touch with him and said, yeah, maybe I'll do some more a year and a half from now. I just need a little break. And I'm stupid, and so I said, I'll do it with you. So that one's only 300 miles. The last thing, Roger, and then we need to get to worship and hang out with the kids.
Where does the western part end? Would Minnesota consider continuing the trail?
No, it's ours. Forget Minnesota. No, they don't even know that there is an Ice Age trail. They didn't bother with glaciers there. The glacier just plowed the whole state flat. We've got the interesting things. So the western terminus is at Interstate Park. This next year is the 125th anniversary of Wisconsin State Parks because of Interstate that we share with Minnesota, joint venture there. Eastern edge is at Potawatomi State Park outside of Sturgeon Bay. Okay.